Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
It was early twilight, and the alarm clock was ticking softly. Otilia could buy a silent electronic one, but she found the ticking soothing. It helped her fall asleep, and in the mornings, it made her more attentive, dispelling drowsiness. Otilia opened her eyes, glanced at the alarm clock, and as always, she woke up 10 minutes before it rang. Now she would lie there for those 10 minutes, occasionally checking how much time remained. She could have just gotten up since she was already awake, but no, there was no alarm yet. Apparently, the brain only kicked into gear when the alarm sounded. It was a reflex that developed over the years. Otilia had once set the alarm 10 minutes ahead, woke up to it for 2 days, and then lay back down, watching the red second-hand tick and waiting for the ring. It was more of a time perception trainer than an alarm clock. Otilia was one of those women who had become more beautiful and confident with age. At 20, she was just a cute, slightly plain student, and all her classmates were crazy about her. By the time she reached 40, she had become a stylish, sophisticated, and intelligent beauty. Her self-assurance attracted men, but no one dared to get too close because she was just too good. She wasn't arrogant, she just seemed to be content with her married life. That was until recently. Otilia was lying, waiting for the alarm to ring. Evening worries flitted through her mind, but they didn't take shape because there was no alarm yet. The alarm finally pierced through, unpleasant and inevitable. Otilia switched it off without mercy, but the seeds of doubt and suspicion had been sown. Otilia suspected her husband, doubting that her family life was as happy as before. She had been married almost 15 years ago to a promising young businessman named Enrique. Back then, he had a car repair shop, but now he owned a whole chain of them. She had already graduated from college and taught at the Olympic Reserve School for several years. Promising athletes from the entire region came here, those who had already made a name for themselves at regional competitions. Among her students were candidates for Master of Sports and champions of various championships. But sports victories were one thing, education was also essential. Otilia taught English, which the athletes with their grueling training schedules didn't really need, so Otilia's main task was to somehow manage lessons and tutoring, hoping to secure a decent education for the athletes. One Friday evening after work, Otilia and her friend Irene, who was a mathematician, decided to relax at a nightclub. Why not? They were young, unmarried, tired of their academic responsibilities, and uninterested in their students. They deserved it. Otilia quickly regretted coming. It was too loud and too bright. She grew tired of dancing and yelling to communicate. She retreated to a corner, but even there, the noise was overwhelming, and the omnipresent spinning spotlights pierced her eyes. Otilia, don't just sit there, we finally got out. Irene danced around the table, eager to dive back into the heart of the dance floor. Come on, let's go. I met some guys, they're great. Well, come on, or I'll never decide who to choose. Irene, can you handle it without me? I think I'll head home. I'm tired. What are you talking about? Going home? We're going to go somewhere else. Don't leave, I'll be right back. Irene, dancing, returned to the bustling crowd. Otilia had no intention of waiting for her. It was clear that Irene wasn't ready to go home. She couldn't be stopped right now, she had just started to let loose. In her short dress and high heels, she was having so much fun that it was evident. Tonight, she was the queen of this club, and no force could make her stop at that moment. She let her enjoy herself, such nights were rare for them. Otilia waited for the music to calm down a bit so she could make her way to the exit through the dancing crowd. Hi. A tall young man was standing in front of her table. Can I sit here? Irene set such a pace, I can't take it anymore. Yes, please. I'm leaving anyway. Can I join you? I crave some peace and fresh air. Let's take a short walk. Can I walk you home? That's how Otilia met Enrique, her future husband. He was a nice guy, had good manners, came from a good family, and courted her beautifully. Was there love? Of course, there was, but somehow without passion. Otilia believed that it should be this way. At 17, you could run to the ends of the earth for love driven by crazy passion, but at 25, you needed to build a reliable, happy family based on love. Besides, all her friends were already married and had kids, and they would tease her. "You're getting picky, princess. These kinds of men won't be interested in you for long. They'll find someone younger. Grab onto it while it's still there." It was a marriage of convenience, but not for money and wealth. It was for a long and happy life. Now, at 40, the thought kept crossing her mind that it was wrong. Maybe she should have waited for that mad, otherworldly love, even if it was short-lived, to see the sky filled with diamonds instead of living 15 years of a calm, prosperous, and happy life that was now spiraling into chaos. They didn't have children, it just didn't happen. Otilia sometimes thought that if they had children, things might have turned out differently. They didn't particularly want children, at least Otilia didn't feel any longing for them. It would have been nice to have a child, but if not, then not. She never understood the enthusiasm of her friends who doted on other people's children, cooed, and played with them, feeling no particular affection when they saw babies. Perhaps she was damaged in some way. She didn't love other people's children. Whether she would have loved her own, she didn't know. They didn't exist. About 2 months ago, Otilia felt that something was amiss in their marriage, like in Hamlet's Denmark. Everything seemed normal, but there was an unspoken tension, as if Enrique had secrets. What secrets? They had never hidden anything from each other. He would stare at Otilia with a fixed gaze, as if not seeing her. Sometimes it seemed like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure if he should. He had always worked a lot, and if he was late, Otilia never thought to be jealous or interrogate him. However, now she watched the clock and calculated when he should be home. If he didn't arrive on time, she'd work herself into a frenzy and start suspecting. Suspecting what? Well, what could you suspect your husband of? It was infidelity. Although Otilia thought that a cheating husband would behave differently. She didn't know how, but for some reason, she didn't believe in infidelity. It seemed too cliché. She couldn't find another reason why their relationship had changed. "Enrique, when will you come home?" "I don't know, it depends on work." "You're hardly ever home, and you don't tell me anything. It's like I don't exist in your life." "Otilia, why are you suddenly getting jealous? It seems a bit late for that. I understand if it was 15 years ago, but now, why?" "I just had a feeling." When you have a feeling, you know what to do. "Anyway, I have to go." He gave Otilia a kiss on the cheek, grabbed his keys, and left. "All right, we talked. Maybe it's really nothing. I made it up myself, and now I'm going through all this suffering." But the gnawing feeling of impending doom didn't let up. No, something was wrong, something was about to happen. To avoid tormenting herself with doubts, Otilia decided to engage in some useful but not very enjoyable tasks. She had her own system for maintaining order in the house. Of course, dusting and cleaning the floors were done as needed, but she hated deep cleaning and never tried to do everything at once. She allocated half an hour for family-friendly tasks. There are public service activities, and then there are family-friendly ones. For example, washing the windows, dusting the bookshelf, or organizing the kitchen shelves. She didn't mind spending half an hour, it felt good to get something done. Today was the wardrobe's turn. It was high time to put away winter clothes and inspect the t-shirts. There must have been something to throw away by now. Well, if not to throw away, then she could take to the country house. They didn't throw anything away. They first took it to the country house, and then, after a year or two of sitting there, they'd toss it in the garbage. When you have a country house, there's no direct route from home to the trash bin. While sorting out the shirts, Otilia came across something hard in the breast pocket. A photograph. In the photo, there was Enrique with a woman. She had seen this woman somewhere before, although she looked different. She remembered this woman was in old photos from Enrique's student days, albeit much younger. Otilia didn't really scrutinize her husband's old photos, but she seemed to have seen this girl. She needed to double-check. The old albums were stored in the back row of the bookshelf. Otilia took out a row of books and retrieved the albums. Spreading them out on the table, she started looking for the photo, which, to be honest, she remembered vaguely, like something she had seen. Otilia didn't even quite understand why she was doing this. She would find a photo of a girl, and then what? It would only confirm that Enrique had met some classmate or college friend and had taken a photo with her. But something urged her to find that photo. It felt like she would discover something very important. After a while, she found it. It was the same girl, beautiful, with a bold look, full of unbridled energy, even visible in an old photograph. Next to her was Enrique, looking in a way that made it clear it wasn't just love, it was passion that would sweep everything in its path, pushing for any action. Something had happened in the distant past, and now it was going to resurface in Otilia's peaceful life. She didn't just feel it, she knew it for sure. Someone knocked on the door. It was Irene. Over the years, Irene had gotten married twice, had 2 children, gained weight, lost weight, and gained weight again, but she remained Otilia's closest friend. Oh, what's this? Feeling nostalgic? Why are you digging through old stuff? Well, you see, I found a strange photograph. Take a look. Here's Enrique with a girl. And here they are, but from a long time ago. So what? Maybe this was taken a long time ago too. No, look, judging by their age, this was taken about a year ago. And I bought him the shirt he's wearing. So, they've met again with this girl recently. He didn't tell me anything about her. And he carried this photo in his pocket either because it meant a lot to him and he was afraid to lose it or because he was worried I would see it. Irene, what does this mean? Well, there are plenty of possibilities. If we exclude the worst ones, like an affair, it could be that he met an old flame, took a picture for old time's sake, put the photo in his pocket, and forgot about it. And now you can't stop thinking about it and painting these dreadful pictures of infidelity. By the way, that's also a possibility. Maybe he deliberately wanted to spice up your relationship by showing you this photo. I could use your optimism. Why be sad about it? Think of it as a tragedy. Even if it's an affair, it's not the end of the world. Of course, you shouldn't forgive him. Remember how I kicked my first one to the curb? I cried, but I didn't forgive. It's gross to scrounge around for leftovers. You'll get a divorce. I divorced one idiot and found another. Thanks, you really know how to comfort. Tell me, what should I do about this? Just ask him who she is. I would ask, but I'm afraid he won't tell me the truth if he's been silent about it until now. And his behavior is strange. I wouldn't have suspected anything if it weren't for the photo in his pocket, but he's constantly lost in thought, not even noticing me. No, they're not just old friends at all, there's something between them. Well, you need to find out. It may be bitter, but it's better to know the truth and make a concrete decision instead of burying your head in the sand. Irene, what would I do without you? You're a walking anti-stress remedy. Find out. It's easy to say, but how do I do it? We're not trained detectives, we haven't gone undercover, and we don't have any special gadgets. All we have is spare time, a car, and an unrestrained imagination that keeps coming up with increasingly wild scenarios. It was probably this very imagination that gave Otilia the crazy idea of tracking her husband. Well, that and Irene's words about the importance of knowing everything and making a specific decision rather than hiding from reality. All of this, of course, was unsightly, unrefined, and even dishonest in a way, but to hell with integrity if it meant living in misery. She tried not to let this ugliness take over and even asked Enrique directly. Enrique, who is this girl? She showed him the old photograph. I don't remember. Probably we went to school together. Why are you in this photo with her? She pushed the photo from a year ago under his nose. Oh, that's Sylvia, right? I remembered. We ran into each other by chance. You met and you remembered her straight away, but you couldn't recognize her in the old photo. Why did you keep her photo, then? Otilia, please forgive me. Yes, I know this girl. We had a relationship a long time ago, way before you came into my life. There's nothing between us now. How long ago? What's this all about? I don't want to talk in that tone. I'm allowed to meet up with old friends without asking for your permission. Of course, dear. Otilia was sitting in her car near her husband's office. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. Even if he came out and drove away, he had many auto repair shops across the city, so he could be going anywhere. She felt like a complete fool but didn't leave. Since she had decided to do this, she needed to see it through. Enrique came out and got into his car. All right, here we go. They drove a short distance and stopped by a cafe. Enrique went inside. Otilia got out of the car and tried to peer through the window to see who he was meeting. Nobody, he was sitting at a table alone. Otilia cursed herself and was about to leave when she saw her, the girl from the photo. She entered the cafe and sat down at Enrique's table. Judging by their facial expressions and sharp gestures, she said something unpleasant to him. Otilia couldn't hear their words, but it seemed to her that Enrique was trying to explain something, maybe persuade or dissuade her, but the girl abruptly cut him off. No, they didn't behave as lovers. What kind of secret was there that he couldn't tell his wife? The girl left the cafe, and Otilia followed her. Why? She needed to do something. She saw her enter a building, and Otilia drove home. She decided that today she would definitely talk to her husband. It was enough with secrets and unspoken words, everything needed to be revealed. The family was falling apart, there was no room for sentimentality. She knew that her husband had had a relationship with this woman in the past. Okay, who hasn't had relationships before marriage? What connected them now? Why did she suddenly appear? What did she want from him? She had formulated all the questions, but there was no one to answer them. Enrique hadn't come home. This had never happened before. Throughout their married life, Enrique had never spent the night away from home. Otilia had gotten used to falling asleep when he hadn't come home yet, but he was always there in the morning. It was unusual, but she didn't feel any particular anxiety. She called him, but he didn't answer. She called his workplace, but they hadn't seen him since he left. That's when she started getting worried. Otilia, have you contacted the police? Irene, what should I tell the police? My husband ran away. Please find him and bring him back. You think he ran away? I don't think so. I have a feeling something has happened. We need to find your elusive husband. You should go to the police. The policeman didn't want to take her report. Come back in 3 days. Your husband probably went out for a good time, and you rushed to the police right away. Otilia tried to explain that her husband couldn't do it. He always slept at home, and if he was gone, something must have happened. Apparently, she explained too emotionally because the policeman behind the glass suddenly said, I understand your husband. I'd run away from a wife like you to the North Pole. Come back in 3 days. Goodbye. 3 days of doing nothing, then filing a report, and then waiting again for someone to do something. But what about Enrique? Where was he? What happened to him? Suddenly, it didn't matter whether he cheated or had terrible secrets. Enrique couldn't have left. He must have been in trouble. Nobody would find out what happened to him, so she would have to do it herself. Although she had no idea how to go about it. The only thing that came to mind was to visit Sylvia. Otilia remembered the address where Sylvia lived. She didn't think that Enrique would be there, but maybe Sylvia could explain their secrets. Perhaps she had at least a clue about where he might be. Otilia approached the building, and at the entrance she saw a young woman rocking a baby in a stroller. Hello. Do you know this woman? Otilia showed a photo of Sylvia. Can't say I know her, but I've seen her. She rents an apartment here on the 3rd floor and has been living here for a couple of months. but I don't even know her name, and she doesn't socialize with anyone. Thank you. Otilia called the apartment. No one answered. She tried again, still no response. She left the building. Miss, does she live alone? She has a 10-year-old daughter. They live together. Have you seen this man by any chance? Otilia showed a photo of her husband. I don't think so. A man did come to see her, but it wasn't him. He came by today too, looking for her. I live on the first floor, and I have a good view of the entrance from my kitchen. I saw her leaving with her daughter yesterday, and it seems like she hasn't returned since. Otilia drove back home. She hadn't found out anything. What to do next was unclear. She tried calling Enrique again. Still, no one answered. There was also this 10-year-old girl. If she had been around 15, Otilia could have assumed that she might have been Enrique's daughter. But a 10-year-old couldn't be their common child. There was no logical connection between Enrique and his former lover. Otilia hoped Enrique would come home, but he didn't. She wandered through the empty apartment, sometimes praying for his return and sometimes cursing him for treating her this way. Late in the evening, her neighbor at their summer house called her. Otilia, did you let someone stay at your house? No, what happened, Valeria? The lights are on over there. I saw Enrique arrive, but he left almost immediately, and someone is definitely in the house. So, I thought if Enrique brought someone, they must be acquaintances. Should I go and check? Valeria, please do, and call me right back. Thank goodness, he was alive. But who did he bring there? Probably Sylvia, but he didn't stay himself. Where did he go? He didn't return home either. And why would Sylvia hide out at their summer cottage? There are so many questions and no one to answer them. Her neighbor called again. Otilia, there's a girl here. She didn't open the door for me, but she said she came with her mom, and her mom left for a while. Should I call the police? No, Valeria. I think I know who the girl is. I'll be there in the morning. Otilia drove to the summer cottage, contemplating how to handle the situation. What if she saw Sylvia now? What would she do? Confront her directly with the question, "Are you his lover?" But what if the answer was yes? What should she do then? She didn't plan to resort to physical violence or engage in a brawl over her husband. She also didn't want to leave with her head held high, as if she didn't care. Pretend that she happened to be passing by. Sure, her husband brought his lover here, and she coincidentally happened to drive by. It sounded like the plot of a poorly written joke. Well, she couldn't come up with anything sensible anyway, so she decided to go with the flow and act accordingly when the situation unfolded. After all, her priority was to make sure Enrique was safe. Otilia got out of the car and peered over the fence. The fence was low and not entirely opaque, giving her a clear view of the entire yard. A young girl was sitting at the table under the apple tree. She had light hair pulled into a ponytail and was dressed in jeans and a slightly oversized checkered shirt. Otilia opened the gate and approached the girl. The girl raised her bright eyes, showing no fear, just silence. "Hello, who are you?" "I never talk to strangers." "My name is Otilia. This is my house, so you are a guest here." "What's your name?" "Marta." "Marta, are you here all alone?" "My mom and I came here, but she left for a while yesterday and hasn't returned yet." "Marta, have you seen this man?" Otilia showed her a photo of her husband. "Of course, that's Enrique. He brought us here. He came again yesterday, and my mom left with him." "Aren't you hungry?" "No, there's a full fridge in there." Otilia entered the house and checked the fridge. Indeed, it was fully stocked. There was sausage, cheese, yogurt, eggs, vegetables, and a chicken in the freezer. They must have prepared thoroughly for their stay here. So, where was Sylvia now? What should she do with the girl? She couldn't just leave her here alone. "Marta, let's go with me. We'll leave a note for your mom. Okay, let's go. What if my mom doesn't come back today? It's scary here at night. While they were driving back to the city, Otilia asked, Marta, where's your dad? He doesn't live with us. He's a traveler. He was in Antarctica recently, and before that, he worked in a circus. He's a magician. Oh, I see, he traveled to Antarctica to perform magic tricks for penguins. Marta seemed to smile at that. She went on to tell Otilia that she and her mom moved frequently and never had a permanent home, but that's what made life interesting for her. They had lived in Greece for 2 years, and Marta liked it there because it was warm and there was the sea. However, her mom had insisted on returning. Marta knew a friend of her mom's named Felipe, who lived in the city. She remembered where he lived and thought they should find him. Perhaps he knew where her mom had gone. Marta, did your mom and Enrique talk about anything when you were on your way to the summer cottage? Mom kept saying that she would go all the way and punish some scoundrel. Enrique told her it was dangerous and we should leave. Otilia couldn't believe this turn of events. She now had to find the elusive Felipe. Maybe he could provide some answers. Marta showed them the house where Felipe lived, saying that he usually arrived at the same time each day. About 10 minutes later, Marta jumped out of the car and shouted, Felipe, as she ran towards a tall, long-haired young man. Marta, my sweetheart, where have you both been? And where's Sylvia? I've been trying to find you for the past 2 days. It appeared that Felipe didn't know much either, but she had to try. Hello, I'm Otilia. Your Sylvia has disappeared, along with my husband. I was hoping you could help us. You know, today has been such a hectic day for me. I was on my way home with one goal in mind, to grab something to eat at the cafe around the corner. Let's sit down, have a meal, and exchange information. Felipe had known Sylvia even before her move to Greece. He knew she was from a small town, had been a beauty queen, had family and classmates there in her native town, and refused to continue her studies. She got married, had a daughter, and later got divorced. But it was her ex-husband who seemed to be the source of her troubles. Felipe didn't know the specifics, but he sensed that Sylvia harbored deep resentment and disgust towards him. She never revealed much about him, just vague details, but it was clear that she despised him. She even moved to Greece to escape, as she had been invited to get married there, but it hadn't worked out, so she returned. Her strange behavior had started after her return. She was always making phone calls, disappearing, leaving Marta with Felipe, and meeting with someone. Felipe was eager to help, but he didn't understand the details of her plans, and now she had disappeared. And, you see, not alone. I don't understand how my husband is connected to all of this. They knew each other many years ago, but I've never heard anything about her. She returned, and Enrique rushed to help her so eagerly that he forgot to tell me he was leaving. Is she some kind of irresistible woman that drives men crazy and makes them lose their minds? No, Otilia, you're thinking in the wrong direction. Jealousy is not the issue here. First, she has a principle, no relationships with exes, never go back to the same river twice. Secondly, I think she loved her Greek man. I don't know what happened between them, but she didn't seem herself when she came back. If she finds your husband after all these years, it means she needs him for something she can't handle without him. I wish I knew what she's up to. Couldn't she have just gone back to her mother? Even if she considered it, Marta would never have allowed it. Besides, she never mentioned her mother. Well, we can't come up with anything now. I'll go home and try to find information about where she lived and who her husband was. I feel like a terrible friend. I never thought to ask. Can you find out? Me? Sure. Otilia picked up Marta and headed home. Talking to someone else's child turned out to be quite enjoyable. The girl was well-mannered, sociable, well-read, had her own opinion, and expressed it in a unique way sometimes. Otilia, do you have children? No. Well, I'm thinking that when you have kids, they might grow up, and you'll realize you shouldn't have had them in the first place. You never know in advance who you'll give birth to. It was quite a radical view for a 10-year-old, a whole philosophy based on some musings, something she had seen and heard. It sounded strange as a child said it, but otherwise, Marta was a typical, non-capricious kid. The next morning, Felipe called. "Otilia, I've found out something. We need to go to her hometown. I'm leaving today, and tomorrow I'll go there, ask around, and come back. Can you look after Marta?" "Of course." "What did you find out?" "Right now, it's just theories. I'll tell you when I get back." Felipe arrived and decided to visit Sylvia's mother first. There was the old, dilapidated house with a stairwell that resembled a public toilet. The door had peeling leather, and the lock had fallen out of it, making it unclear how the door stayed closed. The doorbell, hanging by a cord, of course, didn't work. It was impossible to imagine that Sylvia had ever lived here. Could anyone live here at all? He knocked on the door, not expecting an answer, but the door suddenly swung open. In the doorway, he saw a woman whose age couldn't even be roughly determined. The stench that wafted from the door made him want to run. You couldn't breathe that air. It seemed pointless to ask if Sylvia was here, but he still did. "Sylvia, that wretch, I'd rather never see her again. She left and abandoned me. Her own mother is of no use to her, she just withered away here. Do you even know that she has a daughter growing up?" "I don't want to know. She's a wretch, and her daughter is the same. Get out of here. I've given my life for her, and now there's no one to take care of me." The woman staggered but managed to hold on to the door. Carefully, so as not to fall, she turned and went further into the apartment. Felipe closed the door, pressing it harder so it wouldn't open, and rushed out of the building to get some fresh air. Well, that was it. He hadn't expected such a nightmare. One thing was clear, Sylvia would never have returned here. After talking to Sylvia's mother, Felipe felt disheartened. She wasn't here, that much was clear. There was no reason for her to return here. But since he was already there, he decided to ask everyone and see if any secrets from the past would surface. He went to the school. Sylvia's homeroom teacher was still at the school. With no students to talk to, she was happy to share information about her former student. She was a good girl with potential. It's a shame what happened to her. She went to a beauty pageant for some reason, and after that, everything started falling apart. Although she was beautiful enough to become a beauty queen without a doubt. Have you seen her mother? With a mother like that, you wouldn't want to be a beauty queen, you'd run away just to escape. After the pageant, some rich guy who was 20 years older than her started pursuing her. She left with him. I don't know what happened after that, she never came back here. You know, her friend Liana lives here. They used to be in touch. Liana said that Sylvia called her sometimes. Maybe she knows something? Once again, Felipe didn't learn anything concrete, although he suspected who the sponsor might have been. He already knew that Sylvia had left town with Michaelo Lorenzo, who had organized the beauty pageant. Perhaps he was Marta's father. Now he needed to find Michaelo, but first, he wanted to talk to Liana. Liana worked at the local hospital, so Felipe went there. Liana didn't want to talk at first. She didn't know who this stranger was and didn't want to harm her friend. Felipe used all his charm, emphasized the danger Sylvia might have been in, and finally got her to open up. After the beauty pageant, Sylvia planned to leave with Michaelo. Liana was horrified. Are you planning to live with that monster? He's old and disgusting. His eyes are slimy. What else can I do? Stay with my mother? Leave her, live on your own. Michaelo is worse than your mother. He'll ruin your life and drag you into something terrible, and you won't be able to wash it off. Liana didn't know anything about Michaelo, but she felt it and saw it. He collected pretty, young fools. Sylvia was just another miss to him, but for Sylvia, Michaelo was a ticket to a new life, and she left, not caring about anything. Liana was surprised when Sylvia told her that they had married. Their married life turned into a dictatorship. She couldn't take a single step without endless humiliations, beatings, and total control. How Sylvia managed to have an affair with Enrique under such circumstances was a mystery. Enrique didn't know that Sylvia was married. He fell in love and couldn't understand why his beloved disappeared for several days, didn't want to move in with him, was so mysterious, and had so many secrets. On the other hand, Mikhailo quickly unraveled all the mysteries. When Sylvia announced that she wanted to leave him, he didn't object. "If you want to go, go, but I'll decide where you're going." And he locked Sylvia in a mental institution for 2 years. After leaving the house of sorrow, Sylvia took a long time to recover. When she finally came to her senses, she realized that she was pregnant. She gave birth to Marta. She had long since given up on her own life, but she couldn't bear the thought of her daughter living with that monster. She filed for divorce, grabbed Marta, and ran away. Maybe Mikhailo wasn't all-powerful, or maybe he got tired of his defiant wife, but they divorced. Sylvia was afraid that Mikhailo wouldn't leave them alone, so she kept moving, calling Liana from different parts of the country. Finally, about 3 years ago, she said she had found happiness, had fallen in love, and was leaving the country. And there, Mikhailo wouldn't be able to reach her. Once she called in a frenzy, shouting, "I'll kill him, crush that bastard, and he'll pay for everything." Irene didn't understand it very well, but it seemed that Mikhailo sent her lover photos of Sylvia, beaten and drugged, both during and after her time in the mental institution. He wrote that he was going to marry this fallen woman, and the photos were proof. Sylvia looked terrible, pumped full of drugs, with a vacant gaze. Apparently, the Greek believed it, got scared, and didn't want to tie his fate to such a person, or wasn't as in love as Sylvia had thought. In any case, Sylvia had to grab her daughter and run away again. "I don't know anything else. She hasn't called me since. Thank you for shedding some light on this. If she shows up, please call me." Felipe called Otilia and told her that there was nothing else to gather information from here, and he would be back home tomorrow morning. "Felipe, come straight to my place and tell me everything." "Well, if you make breakfast, I'll come straight to your place." In the morning, a knock on the door woke Otilia up, just when she was having a disturbing, nightmarish dream. She didn't have the strength to wake up and open her eyes, so it was a good thing she was awakened. It was probably Felipe. But it was Irene. "Why aren't you calling? Has Enrique been found?" She burst in like a hurricane. With the years, her energy hadn't diminished, it overflowed. "Keep quiet, the child is sleeping." "What? Where did you get a child? Let's go to the kitchen, have some coffee, and I'll tell you everything. And I need to make breakfast. Felipe is coming over, he eats so much, I'm afraid I won't be able to feed him." Otilia could barely contain her laughter. Irene's surprised expression was so amusing. "I'm sorry, just coffee for you. I didn't have time to go to the store, and I need to feed a man. Don't be mad, my friend." Otilia couldn't hold back and burst into laughter. "Come on, I'll find you a sandwich too." Before Felipe arrived, Otilia managed to tell Irene where the girl and the man had come from. Irene was amazed, and it seemed to Otilia that the most interesting part of the story for her was finding out who Felipe was. She seemed to be planning a third marriage and selecting a candidate. When Felipe arrived, tired, hungry, and upset, everything they had managed to learn didn't help them understand where Sylvia and Enrique were. Knowing Sylvia's character, Felipe was afraid that she had decided to take revenge on Mikhailo. Her resentment and fear for her daughter could drive her to thoughtless actions. Competing with Mikhailo was costly. He was in the highest echelons of show business, rich, famous, and surrounded by stars and influential people. Invulnerable and omnipotent, it was difficult to reach him, and if you did, you wouldn't escape with your life. Sylvia wasn't the kind of person you could pity. She would either kill you or put you in jail. But what would happen to Marta then? It was interesting how they were thinking about Sylvia and Marta but didn't seem to care about Enrique. Understandably, he was at fault. He shouldn't have gotten involved in someone else's story. But since he had, Otilia would like him to come out of it without any losses, at least alive. Otilia didn't know how to behave with her husband when he returned, or if he returned. What kind of abnormal love was this, that after all these years, he would spit on his family's well-being and get involved in an adventure? Sylvia might not be going down that path, but Enrique seemed to hope she would. There was no other explanation. He intended to return to Otilia. If so, how? Would he come and continue their normal lives as if nothing had happened? Did he think it was possible? Otilia no longer understood if she wanted her husband to return. The only thing she wanted now was for him to be alive, and the rest would be seen later. Their amateur detective work had hit a dead end. Sylvia's secrets were revealed, and there were no secrets about Enrique. What was next? Felipe believed that the only way forward was to dig into Michaelo's life. If something unexpected and unpleasant had happened in recent days, it was likely that their avengers had started to act. They needed to stop them as soon as possible, before any harm was done. I'm going home now to get some rest and find out what Michaelo is up to these days. Felipe, who are you if you can find out what the powerful people of this world are up to? Irene was clearly interested in the young man. I'm not that big of a deal myself, but I have a few friends, including some from the showbiz world, who I think might be in the know about Michaelo's affairs. If I find out anything, I'll call you. Don't be upset with Marta, she's a good girl. Felipe left, and Otilia and Irene started contemplating what kind of revenge Sylvia had planned. They put themselves in her shoes, wondering what they would do if their husbands had twisted their lives. Otilia, perhaps, would try to forget it like a bad dream, but Irene, most likely, would seek revenge. How? One could send photos of the current wife to the ex-husband's mistress, publish a story in the press, and tarnish his image. It all seemed somewhat petty and toothless, but their imagination didn't stretch beyond that. Otilia enjoyed spending the day with Marta. They went to the mall, bought clothes for Marta. She didn't even have pajamas, just one shirt, went to a cafe, had ice cream, and then bought groceries before heading home to prepare either lunch or dinner. Felipe was supposed to arrive with news, and Irene, of course, wouldn't stay at home. While cooking and talking with Marta, Otilia couldn't get her husband out of her mind. Of course, she was angry, but she was even more furious with the unknown Sylvia. Revenge against an ex-husband was probably justified. How could you not think about how your adventure would affect other people, Enrique and Otilia, for example? Felipe and Liana believed that Sylvia was an innocent victim who was hurt and offended. Otilia didn't share that view. Over these past few days, she had developed a completely different image of Sylvia. In her mind, she was bold, authoritative, unforgiving of insults, and ready to trample on anyone. Sylvia probably had reasons to take revenge on Michaelo, but Otilia doubted the degree of her guilt, and the ease with which Sylvia put other people's lives on the line, including her own daughters, was astonishing. In the evening, they gathered for a council. Felipe shared what he had learned. Michaelo was indeed facing troubles. First, something minor. Someone sent his young wife, an aspiring singer nobody had heard of yet, photos of her husband having fun with his mistress. The mistress was even younger, and apparently she was even more eager to become a star. Otherwise, the popularity of this old, creepy sugar daddy among young girls couldn't be explained. However, the young wife, who was not wise beyond her years, did not notice the infidelity, and no scandal erupted. If Sylvia had done this, her first blow would have missed, but the second one was much more serious. Michaelo's production center was churning out stars like hotcakes, with no gaps in between. If stars were shining, it meant someone needed them. It was the sponsors who invested significant money and expected huge returns. Their outrage knew no bounds when they found out that Michaelo was spending most of the money not on promoting the stars, but on himself. These were not empty words. They were presented with documents and evidence of how much had been spent and on what. The production center was bursting at the seams, sponsors were demanding their money back, and the unfinished stars realized that fame was passing them by. Apparently, Sylvia had been planning this blow for a long time and disappeared when she was ready to strike, realizing that Mikilo would never forgive her for ruining his career. Oh my God, what did she hope to achieve? Did she think Mikilo would wipe it all away and not investigate who had initiated this? Otilia was horrified. But the most frightening part was that Enrique would be caught in the crossfire of the retaliation. She was now convinced that he was involved in this. He probably didn't help Sylvia gather information, it wasn't his level. But the fact that he hid her from Mikilo was indisputable. Otilia, let's not panic, Felipe said, sensing that Otilia was on the verge of breaking down. We're not even sure if it was Sylvia who did this. She must have gotten those documents from somewhere. I couldn't find anyone in her circle working in Mikilo's center. Although I didn't know much about her at all, as it turns out, Felipe pondered. Irene walked in with a cup of coffee. Otilia, do you have something stronger? You can't figure this out with coffee. She must have known that Mikilo would seek revenge now. What? Did she plan to hide her whole life? I don't understand what she gains from completely ruining Mikilo now. On the contrary, he's her personal enemy. How could revenge blind her so much that she didn't think about Marta? I don't understand why she didn't think about her daughter, Otilia added. Felipe, it seemed, was starting to doubt Sylvia's infallibility. Let's have a drink, Otilia suggested, placing brandy on the table. Explain to me what I should do. My husband is missing, for God's sake. 3 days have passed, but there's no point in going to the police. As it turns out, he didn't disappear, he ran away with some crazy girl and got involved in some strange business. So, what should I do? They were sitting in silence, drinking, and pondering. Irene believed they should have waited for Enrique's return. He would come back eventually and explain everything. Felipe wanted to find Sylvia's informants to understand where she got her information and how much of it was true. Mikilo would eventually resurface, probably sooner rather than later. Such a big name doesn't sink. They needed to assess the extent of the damage and the potential for a counterattack. Otilia had her own plan, to meet with Mikilo and find out his perspective on Sylvia and the recent events. She suspected that Mikilo had an entirely different view of what had happened. They decided that Irene would look after Marta, Felipe would investigate how much damage had been done to Mikilo and what it meant for Sylvia, and Otilia would try to establish contact with Mikilo to understand his thoughts about Sylvia and the recent events. However, she had no idea how to approach the producer. He wouldn't likely open up about his personal life to just anyone. Maybe you could pretend to be a journalist? Irene suggested. It can't get any worse. Right now, he's avoiding journalists like the plague, Otilia replied. Or maybe you could pose as Sylvia's lawyer, trying to settle everything before it goes to court. Felipe suggested. Firstly, no one has filed anything in court yet, and secondly, having a lawyer show up practically admits guilt. We're not even sure that Sylvia was the one who targeted Mikilo. He has enough enemies without her, and maybe he's not even thinking about her. We might just serve her to him on a silver platter, and then he'll definitely go after her. Unable to come up with anything better, Otilia headed to Mikilo's center. The main thing was to see him, the rest would follow naturally. As expected, she couldn't get past security, especially given the recent events. Mikilo wasn't receiving anyone, and there were no new projects or appointments. He had barricaded himself in, so no one could reach him. Fine, they try a different approach. Otilia knew what Mikilo looked like. His scandal with the media personality had been shown on all the TV channels. Someday, he would leave the center. Of course, they wouldn't let her get close, but they needed to figure out how to grab his attention and say something that would make Mikilo understand that it was in his interest to talk to Otilia. She was sitting on a bench in front of the office, fidgeting, trying to come up with the right catchy phrase to get Mikilo's attention. She had several options in mind, but when Mikilo appeared in the doorway, she suddenly became flustered, and all her planned words flew out of her mind. He was walking towards his car, about to leave. She needed to say something, at least. Otilia rushed towards the car and shouted, "My Kilo, tell me about Sylvia. She's ruining my husband's life." The security guards rushed towards her, but my Kilo suddenly stopped them. A small, frail, and seemingly unhealthy man looked closely at Otilia and waved his hand, signaling her to come closer. When she approached, he asked, "Do you know Sylvia?" "No, I've never met her," Otilia replied. "What does your husband have to do with this?" "He left with her." "Get in the car, let's talk." "Don't worry, I don't eat beautiful women for lunch." Otilia knew her worth and had long understood how she affected men, but a chill ran down her spine. She felt scared and somewhat uneasy. She was frightened, but there was no turning back, so she got into the car. "Don't be tense. After all, you came to me, not the other way around." "You must need something from me," he said. "I want to know about Sylvia and her version of events. I've heard her side from her friend, but I don't fully believe it. To understand what my husband has gotten himself into, I want to hear your version." "What's your husband's name?" "Enrique." "Where is he now?" "That's what I'm trying to find out. I genuinely feel sorry for you. If your husband got involved with Sylvia, neither you nor he are in for anything good." He turned to the driver. "Rodrigo, we have a serious conversation with this young lady. It's not suitable to have in the car. Let's head to a restaurant." "What's your name, truth seeker?" "Otilia." "You know, Otilia, perhaps I should have revealed everything a long time ago, but I didn't want to burden myself. I'll tell you, I pity you, and strangely enough, I pity myself. Living the life of a villain gets old, believe it or not, it's your business. But suddenly, I feel like helping you. I didn't expect to feel so sentimental. I hope I won't regret it. I hope I don't have to say this isn't for the press." They were greeted at my Kilo's restaurant as regulars. "Here's your table, everything is as usual," the waiter said. "Otilia, what do you want?" my Kilo asked. "Nothing, I didn't come here to eat." "Tell me everything," Otilia replied. My Kilo's version of events was drastically different from what Otilia had already heard. The only thing in common was that they met at a beauty pageant. Sylvia had immediately identified who held the title of queen and did everything to win it. She wasn't deterred by the prince's age or his worn-out appearance. She wanted to leave her family, and my Kilo could help her with that. He didn't understand how she had ensnared him. He had had so many beauty queens in his bed that one more seemed like an ordinary occurrence. But it wasn't that simple. Sylvia had a relentless grip, and my Kilo couldn't break free. Eventually, he decided it was time to get married. The image of a married, famous producer would benefit his career, and she was a beautiful and not unintelligent girl. If he had known how it would end, he would have married a fool. Sylvia started cheating on him almost immediately. My Kilo knew about it and only asked her not to make it public. He understood that demanding fidelity after marrying such a young girl would be foolish. He didn't need her to be faithful, he needed the image of a happily married life with a renowned producer. "What am I asking for? With the money I'm providing, you could have portrayed yourself as a happy wife." Sylvia pretended for a while, but then she went off the rails. The first warning sign was Enrique. Before him, she had been with many young men, but they were just entertainment. But with Enrique, it was serious. She even started talking about divorce. My Kilo didn't object, but he asked her to wait a bit. He didn't want to give the press any reason to gossip. In secret, fearing that news of her instability would leak out, he placed her in an expensive private clinic that guarded its clients' secrets closely. Sylvia received quality treatment there and returned reasonably stable, behaving decently. If she cheated now, my Kilo didn't know about it, and he didn't need to know. They were living normally, keeping up appearances, and that was fine. When Sylvia announced that she was pregnant, he felt completely relieved. "That's it, she's settled down now," he thought. "She'll have a child, stay at home for a while, and things will get better." But it wasn't to be. Right after Marta was born, it was as if a sign had lit up in front of Sylvia that read, "Mission accomplished." Now, nothing held her back. She threw tantrums and yelled that she didn't want to live with such a disgusting, fat, and repulsive man. "Well, if you don't want to, then don't. I'm done with this. We're getting a divorce. I'm sorry, my kilo, but it doesn't make sense. If she had her own apartment, why was she traveling all over the country? Why was she hiding from you?" Otilia asked. She was hiding in a very original way. She called from everywhere, screamed that I had driven her and our daughter into another hole, and demanded money. I sent it. With what I left her during the divorce and what I've transferred over the years, she could live in her own villa somewhere in the Maldives. But why did you send photos to the Greek man? I didn't send anything. I was actually glad she'd calmed down, and I hoped she'd stay there for a while. I was willing to keep paying just to keep her off my back. But apparently, she showed her true colors even there, given that a Greek kicked her out. When Sylvia returned, she sought revenge on my kilo. However, he didn't understand what for. She either hired detectives or her numerous friends took action, but she tracked down my kilo with his lover. This news didn't impress his new young wife, who was only interested in him as a sponsor. She didn't care about him as a man. It didn't matter to her where and with whom he entertained himself. When Sylvia dug into their financial documents, my kilo got angry. Why bite the hand that feeds you? If my kilo went bankrupt, Sylvia would also be left without money. She should have at least thought about their daughter. He had tolerated her infidelity and everything else, but when the livelihood of his whole life was at stake, he couldn't afford to be merciful. He decided to put a stop to Sylvia. Of course, she ruined my life, but it's not critical. I'm not spineless, easily crushed prey. I'll reclaim my name and influence. I haven't figured out how to deal with Sylvia yet. I know where your husband is. I genuinely have no complaints about Enrique. Sylvia has always known how to manipulate men. I'm an example of that. Don't worry about Marta. I'd be happy if she lived with me. Otilia's head was spinning. She didn't know whom to believe. Before her sat a middle-aged, unattractive, unhappy man with tired eyes. He had a lot of work and money, but no happiness, neither in his past nor his future. Could she trust him? For some reason, she believed that Enrique wouldn't cause harm. He didn't need Enrique, he'd release him. But what would happen to Sylvia? Or was my kilo lying? But why would he? He could have just kept his story to himself, as an unfamiliar woman didn't need to know. Or maybe Sylvia was genuinely ill. In her right mind, she wouldn't invent such a horrible story about her husband. My kilo, I'm not asking what you'll do, you probably won't tell me anyway. But one last question, why did you marry another young, poor girl with ambitions who only sees you as a bag of money? You can't believe she doesn't love you, can you? Why step into the same trap again? These aren't the same kind of traps. Of course, my current wife doesn't love me. I know everything about myself, I look in the mirror. But she's not like Sylvia, she's just a young, naive provincial girl who wants fame. As soon as success comes her way, she'll leave me and never look back. The clever and calculating nature of Sylvia is far beyond her. However, I'm increasingly convinced that Sylvia is ill. I don't understand why she's seeking revenge on me, it's like an obsession. She's always had some issues, but now her issues have completely taken over. Otilia couldn't help but feel sorry for this unfortunate man. Indeed, happiness doesn't come from money. He might not be a saint, but he wasn't a villain who wanted to harm his ex-wife. Otilia thought that he pitted both his ex-wife and daughter, even if she wasn't biologically his. She had heard everything she needed to hear. She didn't find out where Enrique was, but she understood that he wasn't in any immediate danger. That meant he'd be back soon. All right, they'd wait for him. As Otilia was preparing to leave, my kilo unexpectedly said, "Otilia, you're a very beautiful woman. I've been looking at you and thinking about where I've seen you before. At the old French cinema. You're not from around here. Don't get scared, I have no intention of charming you. I won't be able to reach you, after all. Maybe it's none of my business, but Enrique isn't your type either. He's not worthy of you. How many years have you wasted on him? Isn't it enough? You don't love him, do you? So why? Look at me, I'm standing before you, a man who has decided that one can live without love. Don't repeat my mistakes, be happy. As Otilia was leaving, he added firmly and demandingly, remember, my story mustn't come into play anywhere. If anything appears in the press, I will know that you did it. Apart from you, I haven't confided in anyone. I warn you, in that case, I will become your personal enemy. Otilia headed home, her mind filled with the information she had received. She couldn't make sense of it all. Felipe would now insist that Sylvia was the victim of a tyrannical husband, but Otilia no longer believed that. He wasn't a tyrant, he was just an unhappy man who earned money but now understood that he couldn't buy happiness with it. She felt sorry for him, but she felt even more sorry for herself. She had spent half her life trying to create a happy family. And where was she now? Some unstable woman had lured Enrique away, and he had run after her, forgetting that he had a family. That's how much their family was worth. It was time for Otilia to stop lying to herself and face the truth. At home, there was a gathering, and everyone was sitting, anxiously blaming themselves for sending Otilia alone. They were immensely relieved when she returned unharmed. Otilia cautiously shared all the information she had without going into too many details. As expected, Felipe didn't believe her. Otilia, you're a smart woman. How could he charm you so quickly? Felipe, what do you know, apart from what Sylvia told you? Her friend Liana is certain that Sylvia didn't see herself as a victim. Besides, you can say anything over the phone. How can you verify it? I'm not claiming that everything my Kilo said is the absolute truth, but the image of your infallible Sylvia has become a bit blurry for me. Irene, not wanting the discord to escalate, quickly intervened. Guys, break. What are you arguing about? If I understood correctly, there are no issues with Enrique, so he'll show up soon, and we can ask him. But if you think about it, your Sylvia is acting really strange. Felipe, don't you think so too? Felipe stayed silent but didn't deny it. Sylvia was their friend, and he was willing to help her, but lately, he had been wishing she would go away somewhere far. He was willing to help from a distance. They agreed that Enrique posed no threat and would return soon. Sylvia lied a lot, but my Kilo had no intention of seeking revenge, so everything seemed fine. But Otilia wasn't worried about Enrique or Sylvia. She didn't understand what to do with her own life. Did she love Enrique when she married him? Of course, how couldn't she? He was so handsome, and her heart would skip a beat. A refined face and courteous manners. Now Otilia was asking herself, is that enough for a happy life? Well, now she was wise, but back then, she never thought about these questions. When you're young, you don't think about such kind of things. So, amateur detectives, any thoughts on what to do next? No, none at all. We seem to be at a dead end. What's the use? We don't know where Sylvia is, and it's unclear why Enrique isn't returning. Otilia wanted to lie down and think. The wisest thoughts often come before sleep. Dear guests, isn't it time for you to leave? Irene and Felipe didn't object. Yes, it's time. And they quickly left. Oh my, I missed something. Irene, you little devil. How did you leave so quickly? Well, it was always like that, no one could keep up with her. Otilia was lying down but couldn't fall asleep, remembering her life. It felt strange to think of life with Enrique as something from the past. She never imagined living without him. She would have to get used to it. It was scary and melancholic. When he returned, he would probably explain everything and ask for forgiveness. But Otilia couldn't live with him, pretending that nothing had happened. She would always remember the betrayal. She wondered if he would tell the truth or tell some lies. Enrique showed up the next day. He approached Otilia, casually kissed her on the cheek, and looked into her eyes, trying to understand what awaited him and how to behave. Otilia, I'm sorry. There was a work emergency, and I had to leave. I accidentally broke my phone, so I couldn't call. Why are you lying? Of course, no one else has phones but you. Enrique, before you start telling tall tales, I want to say that I was looking for you. I went to the cottage, and I know about Sylvia. Her daughter is sleeping in the bedroom. By the way, how could you just abandon the girl like that? Sylvia never mentioned her until now. Also, keep in mind that I met with my Kilo, and he told me his version of events. So don't demean yourself with lies. Explain to me why Sylvia means so much to you that you got involved in this murky situation and weren't afraid of losing your family. Enrique seemed to have concocted some incomprehensible story, but Otilia disrupted his plans, leaving him with no choice but to tell the truth. It was unclear how much she knew, but getting caught lying was dangerous. I don't know how to explain it. When I saw her, I realized I couldn't refuse. I understood she was involving me in something bad, but she needed help. You know, it's like an obsession, a hypnotic effect. She told me in such a convincing way about my Kilo's abuses and his cruelty that I didn't even doubt it. The only thing I could try to dissuade her from was seeking revenge, because I was afraid it would make things worse. But if I'm completely honest, I was a coward. I knew it wouldn't end well for me either. Sylvia showed up when she returned from Greece. They met occasionally. She would share new details of my Kilo's torment. Enrique believed her and felt his heart ache with pity for the fragile, unfortunate woman unjustly accused of all sins. He was eager to help, rushing to her every call. However, he grew tired of it and increasingly thought about returning to his normal, peaceful life before he met her. Still, Sylvia wouldn't let go, calling, crying, and demanding assistance. The last time she called, she was in a panic. Her husband had tracked her down, and she needed to escape, but she had nowhere to go. Enrique hurried to Sylvia. She was frantically packing some belongings, urging her daughter. Faster, faster, he'll be here any minute. I've gathered so much dirt on him, he won't escape this. Marta, leave those toys. That's it, we should go. While Enrique was driving them to the cottage, Sylvia passionately outlined her plans for revenge against my Kilo. Enrique tried to reason with her, begging her to abandon this scheme as it was too dangerous and involved different weight categories. If they provoked my Kilo, he would retaliate, and it would get much worse. Sylvia didn't listen. She kept shouting that no one understood how much she had suffered at the hands of this man. At some point, Enrique felt that she wasn't entirely sane. She kept insisting that my Kilo was pursuing her, but during his time with her, Enrique never once saw him, and there were no phone calls either. On the contrary, it seemed like Sylvia was relentlessly pursuing her ex-husband, some kind of obsessive idea of persecution. The question was, who was the hunter and who was the victim? Exhausted by Sylvia's irrationality, Enrique tried to persuade her to leave, promising to find a safe place for her. If she didn't have money for relocation, he would provide it. Money? You offered her money? Otilia burst into laughter. It was strained and somewhat hysterical. The money she extorted from my Kilo would last her for 3 lifetimes. You couldn't earn that much. Otilia, please stop humiliating me. I understand I acted like a complete fool. I don't know what it was, some kind of obsession. Well, yes, an obsession, hypnosis, or a curse. We're going overboard with mysticism, aren't we? Under what spell did you forget about me? Can you imagine what I went through when you disappeared? I was sure something terrible had happened to you. I was ready to tear apart those policemen who, with smirks on their faces, said that husbands leave for some days and then return. I couldn't fathom that you simply ran away with your mistress. And you came back? Didn't you like living with a crazy woman? Otilia, I'm sorry. No, I won't forgive you. Keep going. Why didn't you leave her at the cottage? By that time, you must have realized she wasn't in any danger. She could have stayed there. You could have come home and told me everything. Haven't you ever thought about it? That's precisely what Enrique had intended to do, but it didn't work out that way. Before he could reach home, Sylvia called him again and demanded that he return to the cottage. She needed to go to some acquaintances who had gathered information on my kilo and were ready to expose it online, but they needed payment. It had to be done urgently, otherwise, my kilo couldn't be stopped. Enrique didn't understand why he complied again, but he turned around and drove back to the cottage. Sylvia was pacing by the gate and jumped into the car as soon as he arrived. "Let's go." He tried to appeal to her maternal instincts, asking about the girl and who would take care of her, but she wasn't listening. They drove for a long time. Sylvia was agitated and impatient, continually urging Enrique and gloating. "That's it, he's finished now. We've settled the score." It was frightening. Sylvia's behavior was too strange. At some point, Enrique even felt a sense of unreality. He couldn't believe he was caught up in this absurdity. What was he doing here? Why was he doing this? They arrived. Sylvia ordered him to wait and went into the building. He was waiting, lost track of time, and didn't know how long he'd been sitting there, but he inexplicably didn't leave. He thought of Otilia and tried to imagine how he would explain himself. There was a sense of longing. He wanted to drop everything and return to his quiet, happy life. Despair overcame him. He understood that his previous life was gone, but still, he didn't leave, he waited. He snapped out of it when he realized he'd been sitting there for hours. He called Sylvia, but she didn't answer. He got out of the car, stood there, took a deep breath, and entered the building. He had no idea where to look for Sylvia. He couldn't just call every apartment. An elderly lady with pink curls, a real oddity, came down the stairs, trailing a dog on a leash, not pink but equally peculiar. Enrique asked, not very hopeful, "Have you seen a girl in a light jacket around here? Do you know which apartment she entered?" "Young man, even if you thought I was out of my mind, it wouldn't hurt to say hello. I haven't seen your girl, but on the 5th floor, there's an apartment where many people come and few leave. Go there, and you'll find your girl." God, who is this witch? Enrique went to the 5th floor. He didn't even have to think about which apartment it was. One of the doors was ajar. He entered a cramped corridor with flickering lights and tattered wallpaper. No one paid any attention to Enrique. It was as if they didn't see him. It was frightening. Some kind of parallel reality. Enrique had never seen such places before, but he immediately understood what this was. He tried to figure out who among these hunched figures was Sylvia. He found her, picked her up, and headed towards the exit. No one cared who he was carrying or where he was going. They stared with dull eyes, unlikely to see anything. He put Sylvia in the back seat and got behind the wheel. But he didn't know where to go. He thought he should take her to the hospital, but then they'd take her to the clinic. What would happen to Marta? What would happen to him when Sylvia found out who had brought her to the hospital? Without a medical examination, she might die. He called a doctor friend, gave him the address of Sylvia's last apartment, and drove her there. The doctor arrived, tended to Sylvia for a long time, administered injections, set up N4, and said they needed to keep an eye on her for about 3 days. Then he took the money and left. Enrique stayed, looking at Sylvia, who was almost in a coma, and couldn't fathom how he had ended up in such a life. He wished to forget this entire nightmare and return to his wife. He understood that Otilia wouldn't forgive him. Why did he get himself into all this? It had started with a rekindled former passion, and he remembered the love they once had. Then he wanted to feel like a knight, rescuing a damsel in distress from a villain. When he realized that the princess was capable of anything, it was too late to back out. He was deeply entangled in a very unsavory story. He would have stayed with Sylvia, consumed by self-pity, pondering how to extricate himself. But then Mikelo called. He called Sylvia, but Enrique was the one who answered. Without introducing himself or explaining anything, he stated that Enrique could go free and that he would take care of Sylvia. Enrique didn't object. He hurriedly escaped, and now he was here. He was standing there, so handsome and familiar. He had returned, first abandoning her and now Sylvia. Why had he run away from Sylvia? It was clear, it had become too nerve-wracking, too troublesome. Self-sacrifice had grown tiresome, and he had wanted to return to his youth and experience strong emotions once again. But he couldn't endure it. Living in Sylvia's world of fantasies had become very unsettling. And Otilia, what hadn't she done right for him? Otilia gave Enrique a harsh look, and suddenly she had the strong urge to punch him in the face, and that delicate, intelligent, cold face, to hit him so that his beautiful face would distort in pain, become disfigured, and stop standing there and admiring, not feeling any repulsion. She wanted to destroy all the warm feelings she had for this man and herself. He wasn't worthy and hadn't earned it. He had held back and hadn't realized how much he had hurt her. To him, it had all seemed so cleverly packaged in an attractive package. Look, I'm honest, I didn't lie, I came back, told you the whole truth, even apologized. Otilia should have forgiven, been delighted that he had returned, pitied her poor husband, who had been through so much, rushed into his arms with tears, caressed his head, and reassured him that all the terrible things were behind them and everything would be fine now. But instead, she was staring with a frozen gaze. He had shivers down his spine, and it was unclear what she was thinking. It seemed that quick forgiveness hadn't worked out, but that was fine. He was willing to wait. The thought that Otilia wouldn't forgive him now or later didn't even cross his mind. Otilia was only thinking about how she couldn't stand to see him and how she wanted him to leave right now. Enrique, please leave right now, Otilia tried to speak calmly. What do you mean, leave? Where will I go? I said, leave. Get out. Otilia was already shouting, her face contorted with rage. Enrique was startled and flustered. He hadn't expected such an outburst of emotion from his intelligent and tactful wife. He needed to leave because Otilia was on the brink of hysteria. He had never seen his wife in such a state, and he had no intention of finding out what this might entail for him. He had to leave, wait until she calmed down, and then have a calm conversation. He didn't believe she was seriously and permanently kicking him out. Okay, for now, I'll stay at the summer house, and then we'll talk, Enrique said. When he closed the door, Otilia burst into tears. A frightened Marta peeked out from the next room, cautiously approached Otilia, hugged her, stroked her hand, and quietly said, Otilia, do you want me to bring you some coffee? You can cry for now, and I'll put the kettle on. Otilia's heart ached. Perhaps, for the first time in her life, she regretted not having children. If there were a dear little one nearby, for whom she needed to pull herself together and carry on. But now she was all alone. Otilia tried to do something, but everything slipped through her fingers, and tears kept welling up endlessly. It was as if she was trying to cry out all the confusion of the past few days and all the self-pity. From time to time, Marta would check in on her, making sure everything was okay, but she didn't pester her with questions. She understood that it wasn't the right time. In the evening, Irene arrived. Seeing her friend in such a state, she dragged her into the kitchen, pulled something from the fridge, quickly set the table, poured Otilia a shot of brandy, and made her drink it. Okay, now eat and tell me what happened. Through sobs and tears, Otilia told Irene that her husband had returned. Irene, can you tell me if men's brains are wired differently or something? He told me everything, looked at me, and genuinely didn't understand what had actually happened. He isn't pretending. He truly doesn't get it. I can't live with him, I'll get a divorce. You know, a divorce isn't the end of the world. I'm telling you this from experience. But don't make hasty decisions. In our youth, we were all maximalists, and now compromise seems like a perfectly reasonable way out. Think it through carefully and stop crying. In my situation, compromise is not a way out at all. I don't even love Enrique, maybe I never did. Do you really think so? I'm crying myself, I pity myself. I've messed up my life so foolishly. I'm left with no love, no children, and now no husband. Self-pity overwhelmed Otilia, and the tears kept flowing. This was precisely why friends were needed, to console, tell you how smart and beautiful you are, wipe away your tears, and pour more brandy. And so they poured more, until they reached the usual stage of offending women. We're so beautiful and smart, we earn our own living, and yet, in our personal lives, we're not lucky. What about men? There are no real men left, they've all gone out of style. Fine, I was a foolish enthusiast, always getting married for mad love, always for life. But you chose Enrique for reliability, predictability, and the possibility of living your whole life without upheavals. And what did you get? You made a mistake, I didn't see any rot in him. Or maybe it's your fault. Over all these years, he believed that I wouldn't go anywhere, that I'd forgive everything, or, more likely, that I simply wouldn't notice. In short, the husband I raised is the one I got. Well, come on, blame yourself now. It wasn't you who got involved with a former lover, it wasn't you who ran away when you realized that the aunt had mental problems, it wasn't you who got involved in a dangerous adventure to bankrupt my kilo, and it wasn't you who thought that, even though you have a family, you should save it first and foremost. Come to your senses, friend, and stop justifying this jerk. Or maybe you've decided to forgive him altogether. You can, of course. But believe me, nothing good will come of it. I'm scared to be alone at 40. And aren't you scared to look him in the eyes and wait for him to betray you again? As for being alone, you know, I have some options. Are you out of your mind? What options do I have now? Well, we'll see. I also, at some point, thought that I had run out of options. But it turned out I have some. Irene rambled on about her dreams of a happy life, while Otilia thought about how to cope with loneliness. Irene was doing fine, even if things didn't work out with Felipe. She had children, but she was alone. Speaking of children. Oh, but where's Marta? Otilia rushed into the room. She's sleeping, she's tired. Otilia, did you at least feed her today? No, it was her who gave me coffee, brought me sandwiches, and watched over me to make sure I didn't do anything crazy. Strange, with such a mom, the child is perfectly normal in a nomadic lifestyle. By the way, Mom will probably end up in a clinic now. What will happen to Marta? Nobody seems to be interested in where the child is. Yes, it's strange. Oh, what time it is? Irene tapped her phone. Felipe, will you pick me up from Otilia's? Wow, you. What endearments. My goodness, Irene. Well, at least you are happy. In the morning, a call came from none other than Mr. Mikelo. He invited, or rather, declared that he was waiting for lunch. The car will arrive at that time, don't be late. Otilia became anxious, as she knew what the conversation would be about, or rather, who it would be about, Marta. What was there to say? Marta was his daughter, and Otilia was just a random person. It was so hard to say goodbye to the girl. She had been Otilia's savior all these days, but sentimental feelings didn't concern anyone. Once again, they were in a restaurant, with attentive waiters and Mikelo, who seemed to have aged significantly over these days. Hello, Otilia. I'm glad to see you. You won't believe it, but these days, you are the first person I enjoy talking to. The others help, but they also sympathize or gloat. Mikelo, may I ask, how is Sylvia? After sending Enrique home, Mikelo had come to Sylvia's apartment. Sylvia was lying there within 4 drip, sometimes regaining consciousness, sometimes slipping into unconsciousness. Leaving her there was not an option. Mikelo called an ambulance. The doctor said she wouldn't be able to get out on her own, the intoxication was too strong. Special equipment and round-the-clock monitoring were needed here, which couldn't be provided at home. Mikelo had a déjà vu experience. He had been through all this before, and he didn't understand why he was getting involved again. His ex-wife, who had left him 100 years ago, had been trying to ruin his life by all available means. He scolded himself. Old fool, you still hope that she'll come to her senses. She's sick. Even if she comes to her senses now, she'll never be the young, vibrant girl you remember. But he couldn't leave Sylvia to die. He knew that no treatment guaranteed results. He placed Sylvia in the clinic, paid for her treatment, and anxiously awaited the outcome. And now about Marta. Sylvia will undergo treatment, and only God knows what will happen after the treatment. Marta will live with me. Otilia, I can't decide whether to tell her that I'm her father. I'm afraid she won't be impressed to have such a dad. Don't worry. I think she's tired of dangling the world. She'll be glad that there's a relative. You know, I spent a few days with her and felt how much she wanted someone close by. What have I done for her? I just gave her shelter. When I was feeling down, she did everything to make me feel better. You may have missed out with your wives, but you got lucky with your daughter. Otilia felt like my Kilo had been waiting for these words. He needed someone to support him just because, not for money. My Kilo, I'm sorry for asking this, as I probably don't have the right, but can I sometimes meet with Marta? We can go to the park, a cafe, maybe the zoo, or the movies. I'm afraid she'll disappear from my life. I have no one else left, she's the only one I have. Of course, if she's okay with it. I think she won't mind, but first, let me try to mend our relationship. When Otilia returned home, Marta was serving coffee to Enrique. He had returned surprisingly quickly, perhaps intending to wear her down. Upon seeing Otilia, Enrique jumped up abruptly, nervously straightening his jacket, clearly agitated. Otilia, we need to talk. We will. But a little later. Marta, my Kilo is waiting for you downstairs. Do you remember him? Yes. When I was little, I used to stay at his place. My mom would leave me there. Will you go to him? Do you want me to leave? Have I become a bother to you? Oh no, sweetheart, it's just that your mom is sick and will be in the hospital for a while. And my Kilo is your relative. I'm just a stranger, I can't keep you. My Kilo doesn't mind if we keep seeing each other. If you want to, that is. I want to already. Marta hugged Otilia. Don't leave me. I'll go to my Kilo, he's kind, and he has a big house and a pool. Otilia was trying not to cry so as not to upset the girl, but it didn't work very well. She gathered Marta's few belongings and escorted her to my Kilo's car. On her way back, while constantly collecting her thoughts before the conversation with Enrique, Otilia asked herself one last time, have you made up your mind? She finally answered, yes. She took a deep breath and entered the apartment. Enrique was standing there, agitated, as he didn't understand what was happening. He had come to make amends, and yet he was being ignored. What did Marta have to do with this? In fact, it had nothing to do with her. Otilia, what's going on? We need to talk. We need a divorce. I'll file it myself. We need to sell the apartment and the country house and buy some other place to live. What are you talking about? I'm not planning to divorce you. Those are your problems. We don't have any children, so it will be a quick divorce. This is impossible. There's nothing impossible here. It's a standard procedure. I want to be happy. It didn't work out with you. I'll try again. Otilia walked along the park alley. It was a melancholic moment. Thoughts about her wasted life overwhelmed her. Happiness, where are you? She asked herself. And suddenly, Otilia. Marta was running down the path. My Kilo said you'd be here. I missed you so much. She rushed to Otilia, kissed and hugged her, and whispered in her ear. You know, my Kilo is my dad, but it's a secret.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.